So my name's Ethan Tapper. I'm the Chittenden County Forester for the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. This is the first in a series of workshops that the Forest Stewards Guild is going to hold with different people who are, trying to deal with this question of how do we communicate our work as foresters and natural resource professionals. And I'm just going to share some of the stuff that works for me. And there will be other workshops later that will deal with professionals who sort of operate in different spaces and are in different parts of the country. So what does a county forester do in Vermont? We're part of Vermont's private lands program. I say that my job is basically four things. The first thing is that we manage this tax abatement program. We call it the use value appraisal program. Some other eastern states would know it as a current use program, where basically if you have 25 acres or more of forest land, you agree to not subdivide or develop your land and to follow a forest management plan, which is approved by the county forester and monitored by the county forester, and to actively manage your land when it's appropriate. And in exchange, you get a tax break, essentially. That's a big part of our job as county foresters. And that takes, probably 50 or 60% of all my time. In general, as county foresters, we're working with private landowners. So in Vermont, like a lot of eastern states, we're like 75% forested, but 80% of that land is privately owned. And so just sort of like dealing with private landowners, giving them the tools to understand how to manage their forest well is a really important part of our job. And the current use program is a really big part of how we do that. The second thing is that people who aren't enrolled in the current use program, or just anybody, can just request service. So you would know this sort of role as being a service forester, right? So the second part of my job is I just provide service. I just advise landowners on how to manage their land, whether they're enrolled in current use or not. We just talk about, what it means to be a good forest steward. The third part of our job is that we manage municipal forests. So those are town forests. They're owned by a municipality. And I manage about a dozen of these, covering about 5,000 acres. And you manage them for a lot of different things. I manage mine largely for demonstration and education, but each town forest is different. Some of them have really established recreational trail networks. Some of them have a variety of different resources and different stuff going on. The fourth thing is just sort of addressing this issue of how do we answer this question of what it means to take care of a forest? How do we manage forests better? And how do we understand our role as forest stewards more fully? And that can take a lot of different forms. I happen to sort of lean into this education and outreach stuff more than some others. So I have a monthly column in a bunch of community newspapers and a quarterly column in this magazine, Northern Woodlands. I have a YouTube channel. I do dozens of public events attended by hundreds of people each year, usually around those municipal forest projects. So, that's a big part of how I try to get this word out of what it means to take care of a forest. So in my time talking to people about forests and about forest management, I started to wonder why misconceptions about forests, how forests work, what they are, and what it means to take care of them, and also misconceptions about forest management are so pervasive in our work. One reason is because forests are complicated, because they're these really complex systems, and actually like what a healthy forest looks like is pretty unintuitive to most people. Another reason is that forest management as a practice is incredibly unintuitive, right? Like, how could it be that the stuff that we do, and this is certainly not the only tool in our toolkit, but stuff like cutting trees could be something that's actually positive, that it's an act of compassion, that it's an expression of how we take care of these living systems and the thousands of species that call them home. And so I want to talk about, sort of in thinking about what it means to communicate these things that we do, what a forest is and what it means to take care of it really well. I've sort of developed some different strategies for both sharing that information in a way that I think is engaging, and also sort of thinking hard about the way we talk about those things to make it more appealing and engaging to people. I think that even when, there's definitely a problem where I just don't think we do nearly enough public outreach. We don't talk about our work as forest managers nearly enough. But even when we do, I think we use what I would call like the language of mitigation too much. So we talk about why the work that we're doing is acceptable, why it's okay, why it should be allowed, and not enough about why it's beautiful, why it's amazing, why it's generative, why it's regenerative. And all of these things are true. And so we need to stand in front of our work and not just be like, you should let us do this, but we need to stand in front of our work and say, this is exciting, like this is compelling. We're providing all these amazing services. We're doing all these amazing things for this ecosystem. And that shift, I think, in my work has been when I'm standing in front of a log pile, when I'm standing in front of a forest that's being actively managed, that's a powerful shift. And I think it's very disarming for people to hear it that way. And fundamental to my work is this idea that most people believe in forest management, they just don't know it yet. And why don't they know it? They don't know it because they haven't been told it in a way that they understand and that resonates with them and with their beliefs. Forest management, of course, probably most of the people in this room know that forest management can be an asset to biodiversity, to wildlife habitat, to climate resilience. It can do all of these amazing things for ecosystems. We can manage young forests to be more like old growth forests, just like all this incredible stuff. It can be this incredible act of stewardship and compassion for these ecosystems. However, and it can do all those things, I should say, too, while producing local renewable resources. And these are all things that people value. And most people just haven't had the tools to understand the connections between forest management, this action which seems to be like brutal and jarring to a lot of people, and all of those things, all of these incredibly powerful and important and positive things that our work enacts. So broadening the coalition is this term I think a lot about. So what does that mean? Broadening the coalition means, we get into these little echo chambers and we just talk about forest management and talk about the value of our work to people who already agree with what we're saying. And that's, of course, not what we need to do. The people who we already agree with, those people are just sort of, we don't need to do any work to engage those people. We're not going to build a bigger coalition by just talking to people that we already have a lot in common with. Broadening the coalition means spreading our world, spreading the work that we do, and spreading this words of positivity and this message of the important other aspects of forest management to people who don't agree with us. I can talk about foresters, about the benefits of our work all day long. But what I really want to do is to talk to people who do not yet think that they are advocates of forest management. And what I found as I try to do this, as I try to stretch the limits of what our sort of forest management coalition is that a lot of people that we wouldn't normally give credit to for being proponents of forest management actually are. They've just never been asked. I think of my work as giving people the tools to understand what we're doing as forest managers and why we're doing it. We need to recognize, again, that forests, healthy forests, what they look like, how they behave, that's really unintuitive to most people. And forest management is incredibly unintuitive to most people. So I actually had this experience where my folks live in the southeastern part of Vermont, and my mom was like, I want you to see this forest management that occurred on this public land. And so we went out there and we were walking through this area, and there had just been forest management. There had just been logging the previous winter. And it looked really raw. That first, early summer, spring after it always looks so raw. And there was trails all through this area. So there was people walking around through this forest management area. And there was no tools at all to explain what had happened or why it had happened. And I'm a professional forester, and I couldn't totally understand what had happened or why it had happened. And I know that the people who managed that forest had good intentions, and I know that they had a plan, and I know that they were addressing conditions in that forest, and that they were looking forward to some future conditions that they were trying to achieve, and that they were probably trying to provide all these really cool habitats and address all these issues. But to a layperson or a professional forester, there was nothing there that would show us what they were doing or why they were doing it. And so what happens, sort of in that vacuum is people just fill that space with all the stuff they think about forest management, right? And a lot of that stuff is inaccurate. So they just think that the cutting of trees is bad. This is another expression of the commodification of our forests, or exploitation of our forests, when often that is not the case. We manage forests for a lot of different things, for biodiversity, for local renewable resources, to address these legacies of mismanagement of the past and threats in the future. But how is anyone supposed to know that if we don't tell them? And if we don't work hard to tell them in a way that they actually understand well enough that it overpowers that initial feeling that a lot of people feel when they see a tree get cut down? There are massive and undeniable global biodiversity and human rights benefits to producing renewable resources like wood, timber. But where I am, when you lead with the value of timber, which I feel like is a lot of times what our industry does, is sort of talk about this responsibility in producing resources and the amount of wood and resources that people consume. When we do that, I just feel like people in my area shut down. It doesn't resonate with them. When I lead with talking about habitat, biodiversity, climate resilience, people tend to be so much more excited. So that's what I lead with when I talk about forest management. I talk about the conditions that we're creating in the woods. And then, we walk through this whole area and we're like talking about all this cool stuff we're going to do and all these little habitats that we're creating and micro habitats and the ways that we're benefiting all of these really important things. And then we get to the log landing and I say, and as if that wasn't good enough, as if this couldn't get any better, at the same time, we're producing local renewable resources, which have this incredibly, incredibly profound and important role in our world. And in taking care of all of these other things, biodiversity, human rights, social justice, environmental justice, all of these things locally and globally. And that's just a really powerful moment. I think that we also need to think about the language that we use, and trading some of this sort of traditional language for language that maybe better describes the work that we actually do. One thing that, and if there's some foresters who have been doing this for a long time in the room, you might cringe at this, but one thing I've been training myself to do is to not say timber sale anymore. So we've been describing forever, and this is what I was taught to do. It feels so natural to describe when we do forest management in a forest, we bring in a logger and we cut a bunch of trees. We call that a timber sale. It's not a timber sale. It involves selling trees and timber, generating these resources, but it is so much more than that. That's not all that it is, and to call it that to me is a little reductive. What we're doing is managing the forest. And so I've been training myself to sort of trade that terminology, timber sale, for forest management or forest management project. I've been trying to do the same thing with the word harvest. So harvest, again, it sort of, to me, implies that, the forest is like a garden of resources for us to pluck from, and we're going out there and we're harvesting from it. We're just taking from it. But that's not really what we're doing. What we're doing is managing it. And that involves the cutting of trees and the harvesting of timber, but by no means is that all that we're doing. And by no means is that an adequate definition that describes the myriad different things that we're managing forests for. I've also tried to use forest management as a term to separate logging, working with a logger that's being done under the guidance of a forester, from just unrestricted logging, which I call logging. So forest management, there's a forester involved. Logging, there's just unrestricted logging. There's no forest manager involved. Both of those things might traditionally be called logging, but they're completely different things. Again, this is just sort of a slide to say, this is me capturing that moment of, saying as if we're out there talking about all these cool conditions we're creating in the woods. And as if that couldn't get any better, look at all these beautiful resources, which are going to heat someone's home, which are going to shelter somebody, which are going to make someone's life more beautiful, which are going to produce a beautiful piece of furniture. And the other thing that I think is a really powerful thing to talk about at this moment is that idea of collective responsibility, that we're taking ownership of the cost of our lives rather than shipping them off to people somewhere else in the world, to ecosystems somewhere else in the world, to forests that might be managed in a lot more of an intensive way. So I think that that is a really, 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 it's an important nuance in my work of instead of just saying timber for the sake of timber, saying all of these other things that surround the way that we produce resources and talking about that. I actually do a presentation sometimes called The Radical Forest Manager, which is largely about this idea, the importance of forest management from the lens of social collective responsibility, social justice, environmental justice. And I think it's really important, one of the things that stands between us sometimes and getting people on the same page about all this really complex work that we do is this idea of nuance. So there are people out there who have really simple ideas about the work that we do, like the cutting of a tree is bad, or the cutting of a tree is good, is entirely always good. And I think that it's really important as forest managers that we actually learn to get comfortable with and to even celebrate this idea of nuance, that there's something really powerful about saying that, the work that we do, the cutting of a tree is good in this way and under these circumstances, and it might be bad in this other way and under different circumstances. I don't have any interest in just telling you that forest management is categorically good. I don't think that forest management is categorically good or categorically bad. I know that it can be done in ways that degrade ecosystems, but I also know that it can be done in ways that's incredibly positive and regenerative and like profound and beautiful for these forests. And I think that it's important, not that we try to make our message simpler, but that we actually really get excited about celebrating these nuances and how complex these questions are. So I'm going to talk about some of the sort of methods that I have stumbled into as a manager, or as I should say, as I do outreach around the forest management work that I do. Sort of my discovery was doing this from a place of not having a budget, not having any staff or anything like that, and just trying to kind of have to make it work. And I say outreach can be cheap and easy, and I say that not to denigrate the really important work that like outreach people do that is not cheap or easy, but just to say that for those of you who are watching and are saying, I can't be doing outreach, it's too expensive, it takes too much time, I can't afford it, I can't budget it into my time. I know that we are all at capacity, and I know that we are all understaffed and under budgeted, and I am too. And these are some tools that I do not think will take too much of your time. So as I talk about all this stuff, keep in mind that all of this work I'm talking about, all this outreach work, I try to keep it at like below 15% of my time, usually like 10 to 15% of my time, and budget of $0. And there is with some of these tricks, it'll take a little bit more time because you got to kind of get up to speed and figure some stuff out. But I am more than happy with any of these stuff. I'm going to talk about sign templates. I'll talk about making videos. Any of these things, I'll show you how to do it. I'll give you the sign templates. You can just use the ones I already have. You don't even have to make your own. And I'll just send it to you and you can have it. So the first case study I'm going to talk about is this place, the Heinsberg Town Forest. It's a 1,125 acre town forest owned by the town of Heinsberg with extensive recreational trail usage. It's also been managed for about 50 years in a really thoughtful way. And it sort of has this history of active management. So this is a study of just a project where I really learned a lot of these methods that now I use. So the first thing I thought about was, I had been doing some outreach around other projects, and I was just noticing that if you do all your outreach in the same way, like if all your outreach is just like a walk that you do in the winter on a Saturday, and you call them all just like, go take a forest management walk. You get a certain people, but there are other people who just aren't activated by that. Hearing about that doesn't make them want to do it, or they can't do it, or it's not presented in a place where they consume information so they don't know about it, you know? And so one thing that I think about is, I think that another thing that I've seen in our community is that sometimes when we do outreach, we do sort of like just barely enough to get ourselves, you know, to say that we've done this outreach process. But that's not what I want to do. I want to actually engage people. Like I want people to actually show up. And so my idea was, and I want people to actually know about the project. And so my idea was making ourselves unavoidable. So I basically just did this, you know, blanket the airwaves, blanket the world of Chittenden County with information about this project across a number of different platforms. I wrote articles, submitted press releases, did walks, but also inside talks, like at the library for people who maybe weren't physically able to go on a walk or didn't want to. Got on TV and radio, created videos, and made other resources. So the idea is just people consume information about in different ways. People hear about things in different places. Different things engage people and activate different people, different generations, people who think about stuff in different ways, whatever. So by providing all this information in all these different ways, I'm trying to get everybody, or as close to everybody as I can. There's two other things that come with this. One is that I have noticed that people do not like to be surprised. So by just making it ubiquitous in their lives, you actually take away a lot of those bad feelings just by merit of having it not be a surprise that they've heard about it. The other thing is that I think that this message is something which is really important, which is that we are not ashamed of the work that we're doing. We are proud of the work that we're doing. We want you to check it out. We want you to learn more about it. We're not hiding it away because we're afraid of bad optics. We're saying, yes, please, I'm gonna reach out to you in a gajillion different ways. Please engage with this project. Please come to a walk. Please check some of this information out. I do a lot of in-person walks. These are usually, I get the best attendance, 2-hour walks on a weekend, usually a Saturday afternoon, 1 to 3. That tends to be like the sweet spot in the, especially in the wintertime. Summertime walks, usually poorly attended, like between June and August, June through August, I should say. So usually I'm doing a bunch of walks in the summertime right now for a project that's coming up in September, but usually I don't do any walks during that time. I restrict them to times when they're more likely to be attended. I really think, you know, and I should say also, having these walks regularly, different Saturdays, in case people can't make it to one or the other, and doing them before, during, after is pretty powerful. If I can get somebody to show up, even if they're upset, I think it is better than them just sitting at home thinking whatever they think about the work that we do. Because 9 times out of 10, what they think about the work that we do is incorrect, or at least lacking some nuance. And so I want them to come, even if they're mad. I don't want them to sit at home and just, you know, continue to reinforce these incorrect assumptions about what it is that we do. Virtual events, we're doing one now. We're all, you know, fatigued to these because we did so many of them for so long, but they actually do have their place. Again, for people who maybe can't go to an in-person event, or they won't. They're also pretty cool because we can record them. And so people who couldn't make it even to the virtual event, if we record it and if we post it on YouTube or some other place where they can watch it, it doesn't really matter who attends the event in that moment. They can watch it later. And so it's this like accessible resource, whereas for an in-person walk, if they weren't there, it's just gone. They weren't there, you know, they will never see it. And so that is actually something that I think is really important, both from an accessibility perspective and also just from being able to provide this more enduring resource. I'm just gonna take a drink of water. I also found that, as I alluded to before, it's important to not just have every walk be like a forest management walk, because I think certain people are interested in a forest management walk, and you do one and you get 12 people, and then the next one you get 10 people, and 8 of them are the same people. I had this big moment on this walk, which is pictured here, where, you know, after a winter of not really that much successful outreach, we did a walk, and we did it with a wildlife biologist from the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. That's Andrea Shortsleeve. and we called it a wildlife walk. It was ostensibly the same walk, but just with a little bit more of a focus specifically on wildlife. And we got 40 people. And so it made me think about, it made me really think, okay, so it's the same walk, it's the same setting, but we get all these other people who wouldn't self-select to attend a forest management walk. And so I started framing every walk that I did in a different way. So I did walks about wildlife, walks about birds, managing forests for birds, walks about managing forests for carbon and climate resilience, tree identification, wildlife tracking, mountain biking, managing forests in light of the emerald ash borer. I had this crazy moment where I did a tree ID walk and 60 people showed up to it. And I was like, I guess we should just call everything a tree ID walk, and we could still walk through a forest management area. We'll identify trees there and talk about what those different species of trees are telling us about the work that we're doing, or how they're going to respond to that work or whatever. It's a really powerful tool, because suddenly someone who's like, forest management walk, that doesn't sound interesting to me, is like, oh, but I do want to learn to identify trees. And then they're showing up. And that's the most important thing. The next step was starting to think about mobilizing different partnerships, because as I started framing these walks in different ways, I started partnering with different organizations to do those walks. So if I was doing a foresters, managing forests for the birds walk, I would partner with Audubon, Vermont. Or if I was doing a carbon and climate change walk, I would partner with Dr. Tony D'Amato at the University of Vermont. And there's a coalition of organizations that I work with a lot, organizations like the Vermont Land Trust, Vermont Woodlands Association, Vermont Coverts, the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. And in a lot of ways, those are really strong partners, and they add a lot to the work that we do. But also, in some ways, the constituents that you get from those organizations are more likely to be people who are sort of already believe in what I'm talking about, and maybe they get a little bit more information from this outreach, but I'm not convincing anybody new, which is what I'm also really interested in. So then I started exploring these sort of atypical partnerships. Some of these that I really like, the local co-op, City Market Co-op in Burlington, Fellowship of the Wheel Mountain Bike Club, the Outdoor Gear Exchange, which is a cool outdoor gear, local outdoor gear place in Burlington, local high schools, university colleges, community colleges. One that I really, really like was the Pride Center of Vermont. Pride Center of Vermont, Outreach Vermont, and Audubon Vermont do this series of walks that are called Pride Hikes, which are for LGBTQ folks. And I just hit them up and asked, hey, how'd you like to do a walk on an active forest management project? And then they said, great, sure. That sounds like what you're managing that forest for is aligned with a lot of things that our constituency cares about. And now we do 1 or 2 of those walks a year, and they're always like really fun and great. And those organizations are awesome partners. Who would have thunk it, And it's one of those things where I was like, geez, well, what other partners are there out there that could be these amazing partners that could bring all these new people to understanding of the work that we're doing, and could also, sort of provide this foundation of trust, right? Because someone's like, well, I don't like cutting trees, but Pride Center of Vermont's doing a pride hike at this place where they're cutting a lot of trees, so maybe it's okay. And that gets them to sort of soften up a little bit to the work that we're doing, gets them to show up. And I started to think about how many of these organizations that we just sort of write off as not part of our team or whatever actually would be these awesome partners. And there's a lot of them. I also branched out a little bit into cultural events. These are a lot of work, but with both of these, I had a lot of help. One was we did this Heinsberg Town Forest History Night. So we got the foresters and the logger who had been working on the town forest for the last 50 years, and someone from the Heinsberg Historical Society. And we did this big, cool event. 80 people showed up. It also happens that logger is now a Moth Story Slam champion storyteller, Bill Torrey, and author. And so we had him out and we did a storytelling night. And it was sort of just these really cool ways to get a lot of people to show up, and then to sort of slip in this message of, hey, we're still doing this work. We're managing the Heinsberg Town Forest, and we want you to check it out. It reminded me of one person, this guy, Tom Rogers, used to work for Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. He told me that when he thinks about an event, he's thinking about the event as like this 30-minute television program. And our message that we actually want to say is like the 30-minute ad at the end of the program. So you like provide this program for them. And then at the end, you're like, here's what I really want to talk about. I haven't gone quite that far down it. I'm usually trying to provide information the whole time, but definitely when you're getting 80 or 100 people at a whack in these events, it's pretty powerful, and you can get a lot of information in front of a lot of people. During the pandemic, I also, I couldn't do in-person outreach for a period of time, and so I started doing virtual events, and I started a YouTube channel, which now has 685 subscribers, over 100 videos. I had to figure out how to make those videos myself, and it turned out to be pretty easy. You film a long section of you talking about something, and then you edit it. I edit it with the free iMovie app. I edit it on my phone, and to make a video takes like an hour. I found that people are usually watching these videos for like 3 minutes or less. And so my goal now is to have all the videos be 3 minutes or less, which is like just enough time to talk about a single idea. And I'm just really interested in videos in particular because a lot of the other forms of outreach that I do, they tend to skew a little bit older, like we're capturing people who are a little bit older. And I'm really interested in also including people who are a little bit younger and are maybe more consuming information from videos more than from like print media or these in-person events. I also realized, so we did this whole project, it took 2 winters, and I realized that, we did all this outreach, we ended up, well, I'll talk about sort of the wrap up of where we landed and all this stuff, but got this information in front of a lot of people, had all these cool events and whatever. But at the end of it, I was like, well, geez, now we're not going to be doing any more events, at least not a lot of them. And so how are people going to understand what they're looking at? And I think that this could actually take there are 2 dangers of this that I've seen. Danger number 1, people don't understand what they're looking at, and they didn't come to any of the events, so they're like, it's just logging, they're just trash in the forest, which is not true, of course. The second danger is once all this amazing regeneration happens and the forest becomes this incredibly diverse place and people are seeing all these cool species of birds that weren't there before, and they're like, this place is amazing, they don't know that logging happened. And so they still might think that logging is a bad thing, even though forest management using logging as a tool was the cause of the forest that they now love and those attributes about it that they value, right? And so we want people to know that forest management happened, and we want them to know why it looks the way it looks. So I was able to get a little funding, about $300 for 8 signs. These are 11 by 17 aluminum signs. I had some UVM students who just like put together a little template for me on Canva, which is a free online design platform. If you want this template, I will send it to you and you can just use it. Each one of them talks about a different aspect of the project. There's an introductory one, and there's like ecological forestry, what's that? Deadwood on the forest floor, canopy gaps, young forest, early successional habitat, stuff like that. And they're placed in different places along recreational trails throughout the area that we managed. At the first one, and I thought this was pretty cool, at the first one, I created a self-guided tour. So a self-guided tour, I know that this exists, but I didn't know how to, I just sort of had to figure it out. Basically what it is I made a map, a geo-referenced PDF map that you can put into this app Avenza, which probably a lot of you know, Avenza or Avenza Maps, which allows you to navigate on these geo-referenced PDF maps. Created this geo-referenced PDF map, which has the location of each one of those signs on it. So you can go to the first sign, you can scan a QR code, it will download the app, the free app Avenza. You can scan another QR code, it'll download a geo-referenced PDF map, and then you can take a walk through the area that was managed and get a good understanding of a lot of different aspects of what we were managing for. Sort of a good, well-rounded perspective of what the whole project was about. Another cool thing that I figured out was that I figured out where I wanted each sign to be, and then I went out and I made just a short video of me standing where that sign is, talking about what the topic that's on the sign is. So like when you go to the sign that's about canopy gaps, you can scan a QR code and you can watch a video of me standing in that place and talking about canopy gaps. I thought that was pretty cool. And there's also QR codes on the signs that link to this other information. I also really like this resource, story maps, which I'm sure that you all have seen at some point. But I was also realizing that, again, it's really important that after this project, that we're able to like provide enduring information that people can use to understand what we did, that they're not going to forget all the outreach that we did and all of these cool partnerships that we made and all the times we were like on TV talking about it and all the articles about it. And so I made a story map, which just is basically like a recap of what we did, what happened, and enables us to sort of like provide this messaging that then I have a link that I can send to people. And it's like, this is what this project was all about. You know, a bonus is that they're also like beautiful and amazing. I also created this thing called a link tree. So a link tree is another free thing where it's just one link that you can put a bunch of other links inside. So instead of sending people 20 links that I want them to know about a project or about my work, I can just send them one link and they'll get it all. I also, in the process of this, created my own e-news. So this is again free through the MailChimp platform, which is just a way for me to share resources to my mailing list, which is now about 700 people. Resources, events, the monthly articles that I write, just another way for me to just kind of reach out to people directly. So the results of this project, over 2 winters, we held 19 public events. We had over 500 attendees at an active forest management project, which to me felt pretty radical. Countless other people reached through articles and other media, through videos, and these long-lasting educational resources in that forest management area through that story map and that educational signage. I want to talk about one more project in the last 15 minutes that I have here, and then we'll get into some questions. At the Catamount Community Forest, this is a project I'm working on right now. It hasn't happened yet, but it's already probably the most extensive outreach process I've ever done. It's a 393-acre town forest in town of Williston, which is one of the more developed towns in Chittenden County, with really extensive trail system that's getting like tens of thousands of users a month. So the first thing that we did with this project, which is going to be a commercial forest management project, is that we got funding from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to do a few acres of non-commercial grinding for the golden winged warbler, this bird species of concern that prefers these shrubland habitats. So we did this work just over like six acres by these trails, and it's like pretty mellow. A lot of it was just sort of grinding shrubs and stuff like that. And I liked it because it was just this way of just sort of easing people into this idea of forest management without us pulling any wood out of there. We were only there for like a week. It wasn't a big deal. And it was really powerful, as you can see by these 2 drone shots, seeing that area regenerate. Also, this happened to be in an area of aspen, so it cloned itself really rapidly and produced this like incredibly abundant response. So as we're walking, I lead these walks into the area that we're actually going to manage in September. This is an area where I'm like, yeah, we manage this with these same principles, leaving dead wood on the ground, leaving dead standing trees, trying to encourage this sort of what we call like messiness. And look at it now. It's beautiful and it's full of life. Before and after pictures are really important, by the way. If you're not aware of this, it's powerful stuff. So for this project, I started this a year in advance. So I marked the trees that we're going to cut a year before the project actually started. Again, people do not like to be surprised. So I wanted people to see these markings and to have to be like, okay, what's going on? And then I installed this educational signage that I would normally install after it. I installed it a year before. And it's basically like, what's going to happen? Instead of what happened, what's going to happen? What are the resources that we have to understand it? You know, what are these QR code links to various different things, videos and articles and everything else? I actually created also a self-guided tour that people can take through the area, so they can again download Avenza, download a georeference PDF map, tour through the area that we're gonna manage with a map that has a legend on it that says what all the different tree markings mean. And I also had these signs that said, what do these markings mean? Trees marked with a diagonal slash, trees marked with a dot or spot, trees marked with an L, trees marked with a double slash. just so it's totally transparent and people can check it out, visit all these different signs, and really get a sense of the area. We've done a bunch of public events, about 14 public events. Catamounts interesting. It's a birding hotspot and has this really active and amazing birding community. So I've been really focused on birds and actually got so inspired by birds this year. Also with the help of that Merlin app, going from like casual birder to like mega birder in my own life, and have pursued Audubon endorsement basically just for this property because it's so special. And because birds are this just incredibly powerful way, if you haven't learned about birds and use them as a tool to explain the value of the work that we do, they are an incredibly important tool to describe all of these nuances of forest management and their value. An incredibly important way to get people to show up for events, and an incredibly important way to show people how the work that we're doing has tangible value to something that they really care about, even if they can't see that with just making a forest more diverse or many of the other things that we do. We've also done a bird banding event, as you can see here in the upper right. 2 events about managing forests for old growth characteristics, which is something I'm really interested in. An event with City Market Co-op, a tree identification event. We're doing a wildlife event and an event with the researchers. It's also, this project is part of this research project called Adaptive Silviculture for Climate Change, spearheaded by Dr. Tony D'Amato and other researchers from the University of Vermont. I also created a YouTube playlist. So within my YouTube channel, playlist of videos just about this project. And a link tree, all the links that have been generated about this project, different articles that have been written, times we were on television, videos, links to the YouTube playlist, etc. Links to similar projects and other information. Again, Linktree is free. And I've been recognizing the value of that sort of before and after imagery. And that's my buddy Tim. He's just a volunteer. And he's been taking some drone imagery for us as well, so we can get before, during, after, years after imagery of this project, which is going to be really important to showcasing this changes over time, which is something we want to show. And then this other thing, this has turned out to actually be a lot of work, but this other thing I got excited about, my department just got an Instagram page. And one of the things that I think is really powerful for us to highlight, especially as we're sometimes criticized for our work, is to show that the partnership that we have, that we're part of actually a coalition of different organizations who are addressing all of these different complex issues, doing it from lenses of, what the Vermont Land Trust, land conservation and stewardship, from Audubon Vermont, conservation and stewardship through the lens of birds, and there's a whole bunch of other ones. Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife, primarily concerned with wildlife habitat. And showing that we're aligned on these things. We support this project. We think this is a good idea. And, showcasing that partnership and the fact that we are this coalition. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to do an Instagram takeover where I post a post every day for a week on my department's Instagram channel. And every one of those posts is going to be a collab post, which is where 2 pages post jointly with a different partner. And so it'll be Vermont Land Trust, Audubon Vermont, Vermont Coverts, City Market Co-op, and Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. And each one will be and the University of Vermont, Rubenstein School for the Environment and Natural Resources. And each one will be highlighting a different aspect of this project and how we're partnering to make it work. So stay tuned. Project that hasn't actually happened yet. I had some other stuff I wanted to talk about, but I think it would be really neat. I'm going to rip through a couple more slides, but then I want to get into the questions. One thing, as we're talking about like narratives that are really helpful and things that are really important, just as tools as we talk about these things, I always start with history, because I think that people have this idea that our forests are perfect and pristine, or even that they're normal, and they are not normal. They're dealing with all of these incredible, profound legacies of the past, non-native invasive plants, animals, pests, and pathogens, all of these, and moving into this really uncertain future. And so starting from a place of history where we're like, yeah, our forests are incredibly altered, maybe we have some responsibility to help them redevelop some of these characteristics that have been lost, that our native species adapted to for thousands of years, and or to help them sort of regain some of these qualities that have been lost in that process. I think that's really powerful. Restoring old forest characteristics, is like really important and powerful. The techniques for how we do this are contained within a lot of the forest management that we already do. We're just not talking about it. Stuff like leaving big trees, we call them legacy trees. Not all big trees, but leaving these sort of like big trees that are really rich wildlife habitat, leaving dead wood on the forest floor, creating a multi-generational forest, creating that structural diversity, different age classes of trees. All of those are elements of creating these old forest characteristics. And, as people are sort of mythologizing old growth, it's important that they understand that like old growth is not valuable just because it's old. It's valuable because of the qualities that they have. And those are qualities that we can actually create through management. And a lot of times they're the same attributes that we're creating intentionally and that people are complaining about. And so it sort of like flips on its head of what the work is that we're doing and how people can look at these things like deadwood on the ground that they might think of as being pretty unpleasant. And I play with all these different little narratives, different ways to talk about these things. I think about, sometimes I'll, talk about these historical accounts of like how rich with life our forests were, these historical accounts of like there's fish and game everywhere. And, we have these incredibly altered, young, simple forests. And through forest management, we can help them develop these attributes, which they haven't seen for dozens of generations of people. And as such, develop a capacity for life, which, we haven't known for centuries. I think that that's a really important thing. Talking about our work, again, it's not about how the work that we do is okay. It's about how the work that we do, we're actually like building something beautiful. And we're building something really important. Our work is generative. It's not extractive. And playing on this idea of responsibility. And finally, I'll ask this question a lot of people of what does it mean to love a forest? And to sort of like challenge this traditional conception that there's this idea that what it means to love a forest, what it means to care for a forest is to do nothing. And in light of all of these things, in light of the threats that our forests face in the present, the legacies of the past, the challenges of the future, all of the incredibly complex and nuanced challenges that we as forest stewards deal with every single day, to say that to love a forest is to never cut a tree and to never do anything is not accurate. And what it means to actually love a forest might mean engaging with this incredibly nuanced reality that we all deal with every day, that we can love trees and cut trees, that what it means to love a forest is unintuitive at times and requires us to be a lot of different things at once. With that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I would love to check out some questions if there are any in the chat.
Thank you, Ethan. Yeah, so if you're interested in asking a question, you can either unmute yourself and ask or put a question in chat. I can monitor the chat while others are asking in sort of real time with their voices. Could you please introduce yourself and then ask your question?
Sure. Adam Moore. I actually don't live in Vermont. My uncle lives in Addison County, though. I'm actually a forester for the Colorado State Forest Service and work with the Stewards Guilds on some projects over here. But I'm just curious, you're a real good presentation, lots of insights. But is most of the information kind of on like who and how to reach out to people? Is that based off of experience in chatting with partners, or is that taking information from like the National Woodland Survey or any types of outside types of information?
No, that's just for me doing it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's just for me literally, scratching my head and thinking about how do we do this, and then just trying a bunch of stuff, basically, and doing those events and You know, it's kind of interesting, like with reaching out to these different partners, even partners you wouldn't think of would normally be interested in this kind of stuff. I've never had an event that I felt like was bad, or I've never had an event where I was like, nah, I don't want to do anything with that partner ever again. You know, they've always been really positive experiences. But yeah, no, I've just been sort of doing it by scattershot, just trying stuff.
Thanks. Hats off to you for that.
There is research that has speaks to this reality that we're probably somewhat aware of, where our connections to the things that we feel closest to or that we hold as our core values, and for many of us that might be forests, or it might be nature or rivers. There's research that shows that we're brought to those things by trusted entities in our lives, whether it's when we're children or whether we're adults. That can differ by person, but it's always somebody trusted in our community. And so Ethan was talking about reaching these partners that maybe don't seem like intuitive lines being drawn between forest management and particular audiences, but it's finding the folks who can understand the value of a walk about forest management, because we're able to talk to them in about it in ways that they can understand, and then the rest of that community will come because of them, not because of us.
Yeah, and I think that at times there's like, just about the like cutting trees thing. There is just a little bit of like instinctive resistance that we need to break through, and sometimes just partnering with a trusted organization does it. You just get different people, and sometimes having an offering like a video does it too, because then people don't have to like, they really don't know what my whole deal is. Am I just a guy who just hates trees, and they can just watch a video with me. They don't have to commit to coming and hanging out with me for 2 hours in the woods. And I think that can also do it.
Any other questions? I see something in the chat. Looks like a resource.
Yeah, what will my woods look like, produced by the Maine Forest Service? That's a cool before after resource where you can check out. They did a really, really good job of checking out these projects and like following them and taking pictures from the same place so people can see what they look like after. Elise asks, how do you measure success in your outreach? By numbers engaged, by the quality of the conversation? Elisa. I wish I knew the answer to that question. I think that I definitely judge the success of how I'm presenting information, like how I'm framing these events, somewhat quantitatively. So like, I know that I have presented an event in a compelling way if I get a lot of people to come to it. And I'm like, okay, this is an event about birds. And every time I do an event about birds, a lot of people come. So I go, okay, that's been successful. And similarly, like with YouTube videos, we can judge the number of people who are watching, stuff like that. Otherwise, I really don't know. I'd be very interested to learn, like have some other ability to quantify stuff, the value of this work and how it's impacting people. But right now, it's just, I'm just this guy with no budget and, 4 hours a week to try and figure it out. And I haven't been able to yet.
Other questions?
So Thanks, Nancy. So one thing I would offer again, how about this? I'm going to link to my link tree, and you can check out some of these resources. And hold on one second, and I'll put it right here. Isn't that cool? That's a link tree. Just one link. Everything's right there. It's free. And I'm gonna put my stuff right there. And again, I'll repeat my offer. Like if y'all want to chat about this, if you have questions about any of these things and you want to talk on the phone about applying these to where you are, if you want signed templates, if you want me to show you how to make a YouTube video, I will do it. And just hit me up. And I'll put my email in here too. And I mostly just want more people to be doing this stuff, because I think it, yeah, I mean, one thing I've realized about a lot of these things is it's like, the more people do it and the more we're showing that this work that we're doing is commonplace and it's normal and it's not like, me standing out there by myself, the more powerful of a message it sends. Colleen says there must be a YouTube video about how to make a YouTube video, which I'll bet there is. But I haven't watched it.
Well, if there's no more questions, thank you all so much for joining. Thank you so much, Ethan, for the idea and for the topic and for the presentation and sharing this information. I've gathered a lot of information, but also a couple of ideas on some information we could follow up more with related to evaluation, as one question came in, and finding audiences. So again, this is the first in a series on communicating forestry, hosted by Guild members. So if you are a Guild member or know of Guild members, or if you're a Guild partner or otherwise know of folks who are doing great things in communicating forestry, let us know. We're looking at one coming up related to photography, and several other topics. So please let us know and help us out to build this webinar series that I think people are really interested in tapping into. So thanks again for being here. I will put the recording on the Forest Stewards Guild webinar library page, which you can link to from our events page at foreststewardsguild.org. I saw another question, Ethan.
You want me to just hit that one real quick on the way out?
Sure. How do you decide how to adapt your message with different partner groups?
That's such a good question. That could probably be like its own webinar. But I mean, I guess, what's interesting, Mary, is I walk with, so in most of my job, I'm walking with like individual people or couples or families. And so those individual people are like all different kinds of people. And so it's just fun. It's like, it almost sometimes feels like it's practice for being in front of these big groups of people, because you're talking about these different things and you talk about it one way and you can tell it doesn't resonate, and you talk about it another way and you can see like their eyes light up. And so I'm sort of like, I feel like I've put in a lot of work talking to individual people and refining, obviously how to not just like talk about these things, but how to communicate them using different words, talking about them in different ways, telling different stories, and in ways that are resonant to different kinds of people, or people that seem to be like coming from different places, valuing different things. And I think that is really something that I've put a lot of time into figuring out. And so that doesn't really help as like, this is how you talk to this person, this is how you talk to that person. But one thing I would say is that I think that there is a way to talk to anybody to advocate to anybody with any system of values, and make the case for responsible forest management. So like an example of this would be, I talk a lot about diversity, species diversity, different species of trees, structural diversity, different sizes and ages of trees, and in the forest. And I talk about that from a perspective of restoring these old growth characteristics, from climate change, climate resilience, wildlife habitat, bird habitat. And I can also advocate for that same thing from a place of financial perspective. So if there's someone who literally, I don't meet these people very much, but if there's someone who literally just sees their forest as a commodity, we can talk about how the price of different species of hardwoods have fluctuated wildly over the last 50 years. And so actually, it doesn't really make sense to be managing your forest for a species of tree which is valuable now. It makes much more sense to diversify your investment. And so then you're buffered against any extreme market changes as it pertains to an individual species of tree, right? That you can make the same argument about structural diversity, maintaining different ages of trees, because that forest is more resilient to catastrophic disturbances. So if you have a windstorm and you have an even-aged forest, there's a higher chance that all the forest in the overstory will be lost and you will lose the value in those trees. If you have a forest which has different canopy layers, you're buffered against that, and you've thus sort of, again, diversified your investment, not put all your eggs in one basket, right? And I think that thinking about how to, like, what are the core values that we want to promote in forest stewardship, and then how do we make an argument to different kinds of people where we're not saying to do necessarily even different things, but we're appealing to different sensibilities. I think I think about that a lot. And it is kind of fun when you get, connected with a different group of people who has just completely different values. How am I going to advocate for the stuff that's important to these people? All right, y'all.
Thanks again, Ethan.
Have a good night, everybody. Hope to hear from you.